Hi, everyone. I'm Sheri Shannon, co-founder of Southside Relief. My pronouns are she, her. And as Jeremy has shown you already, we have collected a lot of data. We are able to see how the impact of redlining and Jim Crow policies, what it's done to communities throughout the city of Richmond, and in particular across Southside. What the data shows is that because of these harmful and racist policies, residents in Southside have a life expectancy which is up to 20 years shorter than their white counterparts. And we're able to see historically across these data trends how that's come to be because not only of these decisions, but the built environment in which people are living in. And so what we've done across the city of Richmond for nonprofits and academic institutions, we've used this data to actually secure some additional funding and to actually to make progress with a lot of these projects that Jeremy has been talking about. So let's talk about what we've done with the data. Thank you. So in 2020, Mayor LeVar Stoney announced the creation of 5 new green spaces across Richmond Southside. And that was driven by the Climate Equity Index. The indices actually show where from redlining because of social inequities and also a lot of these health outcomes that green spaces were needed specifically in South Richmond. And so what we are working on, we, the nonprofit community, we're actually trying to make that a reality. Next slide. The new funding that we've been able to secure has brought in millions of dollars into the city of Richmond. And I want to emphasize that we've been successful in securing grant dollars, including some donations from private entities as well, because we're able to actually outline where the problems are. So we know for years, just based on our own personal observations and lived experiences, like what we are facing with every day. We know that it is hotter when we're outside because there's fewer trees. We know that folks within our neighborhoods, especially in Southside, actually are going to the emergency room at greater rates. The youth in our city have respiratory illnesses such as asthma. Richmond is an asthma capital, but it's like when it comes to actually like local governments and what they're actually willing to invest in actually like creating solutions, we needed that data to actually help us do that. And so we had the environmental literacy program, which gave us $3.5 million. There was the NOAA grant, which Southside Relief, Groundwork RVA, as well as some other partners with the Science Museum, we were able to secure funding there. We have great partnerships with like Chesapeake Bay Foundation and even Capital One. So all of this funding has come in over the last few years. And we have to shout out Jeremy for doing a lot of this legwork because without that, we wouldn't have been able to secure that funding. Additionally, outside of the city of Richmond, the Virginia Foundation for Independent Colleges, again, shout out to Jeremy, was able to work with universities around the Commonwealth of Virginia, in which we did all of that urban heat island mapping and expounded it to 10 other localities across the Commonwealth. And so here, we see just a compilation of some of the universities that participated. The University of Virginia, there was Virginia State, which is a historically Black college and university, Randolph-Macon College, which is in my hometown of Ashland, all participated within this study. And what is incredible about this, again, I'm just going to keep emphasizing that when localities are able to access this data, that means that we as advocates are able to go to our elected officials and say, this is what we are seeing. And when we're going to elected officials and say, this is what we are seeing, these are the problems that we are encountering, you can no longer ignore these issues. We have a stronger leg to stand on when we are making our case for why we need additional investments within our communities to solve these problems. Another study that I thought was interesting is also something that's come out of the Science Museum as well, is air quality. So as we know, unfortunately, many communities, especially folks who live in proximity to garbage incinerators, factories, industrial waste, pollution, a lot of these communities look like people like me. They're often people of color, Black and brown folks, or they are lower income white families. And what unfortunately that means is when looking at this air quality and living in proximity to waste, we're starting to see like, wow, okay, families who live in more affluent neighborhoods compared to communities of color who live in formerly redlined neighborhoods, neighborhoods that also had to deal with urban renewal, in which the federal government decided to raise highways raise neighborhoods to build highways. Their quality of life and their health outcomes look vastly different. And so what Jeremy and Devin are doing now through RVA Air is actually quantifying that data through air quality sensors. And shown here, we have another great example of citizen science in which we are working with volunteers, just everyday folks who are going out into the community, learning about this, but also using their time and resources to measure air quality throughout the city. And all of this has led to a lot of partnerships. And so here you see kind of just a smattering of logos, but what that really means is that there is no single actor responsible for how we are tackling these issues within the city of Richmond. We have incredible partnerships with the Department of Parks and Recreation and Planning. We have secured funding through nonprofit organizations such as the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Forest Service as well. And then there are organizations like such as myself on the ground, which are grassroots groups in which we are coming to the table, in which we're having these conversations and we're saying like, look, okay, you've been able to secure these dollars, pass it on to us, the grassroots organizations, and we can tell you where these projects should go. The community, they're saying like, we want trees here, we want a community garden over there. Safety is an issue. How can we have greater community connections? And so from this data, from all of this new funding, we've actually been able to do a better job in creating a framework throughout the city. One, establishing our lanes, knowing what our strengths are, and then saying, okay, this is the best way for us to actually implement these projects. And then in the future, as we continue to secure additional dollars for projects, we can build onto all of those lessons learned and say, all right, now how do we expand this framework to bring in more organizations, more community groups, more churches, more civic associations, and even PTAs to be part of this collaborative of work that we're doing? So looking at this redlining map that Jeremy has already shown us, and you're looking at the stars here, as you can see, where the stars are located, that's where we are focusing a lot of our tree planting projects throughout the city. We want to be intentional with where we are planting trees. Unfortunately, what has happened in the past and what continues to happen is that, well-meaning folks, they go into a neighborhood, they're like, we're going to plant some trees, and the trees die. I think we kind of all know that story, right? And if we break that down even more, the reason why a lot of those planting projects have not been successful because they were done by white-led organizations going into Black and brown communities and not having that relationship with the neighbors and the residents within those communities and saying, we want to do something here, or can you tell us what those existing problems are? The good news is we've already done that work and we are doing that work. And so it's not a coincidence that the community-driven tree planting projects that you see here starred on this map, that they're taking place where they are because we have already established and built those relationships within the community. So pictured here, we have on the right, this is me teasing, giving my thumbs up at a planting that we did at Hickory Hill Community Center. That was in partnership with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Department of Parks and Recreation, as well as Groundwork RVA through the Greening Southside initiative. On that day, we planted about 100 trees at this community center. And on the top left side, we see volunteers, but there's also trees that were planted at Swansboro Playground, where we planted about 75 trees there through the same Greening Southside initiative. And I want to point out that what we really appreciate about doing those planting projects is from concept to completion, the community was involved the entire time. So for Swansboro Playground, they have a Friends of group in which the residents adopt the playground and they take care of that space. And so when we were doing the site assessment and we were looking at where we wanted to plant the trees, the president of that group was there. When we planted the trees on the day of, we had community members who helped with planting the trees. And then as Groundwork RVA, who has a contract to do the maintenance and the watering for those trees, again, those residents who live within that neighborhood, they raised their hands and they said, we want to know how we can take care of those trees. That is what we focus on with community engagement. We don't want to just reach out to people for an event, have them show up on the day of. We want to make sure that we're building in education, we're building in workforce development and some type of training so that people can take ownership of these spaces. And what is significant about this, when you drive past Swansboro Playground or even Hickory Hill Community Center today, you see more families using those spaces. We talked to some neighbors who were sitting on their front porch and in front of the playground. And they're like, you know what, man? I don't remember the last time I've seen so many people over here. Kids are playing, they're on the swings, they're walking their dogs. And that's what we like to hear. That is why we do this work. So again, when you're thinking about how you're engaging with the community and how you want to use volunteers, make sure that they're not just showing up on the day of, but that you're giving them opportunities to express what they want within their community, that you're helping them to secure additional funding for maybe artwork or a mural, and you're giving them the expertise and resources where they can take care of that green space in the future. All right, next story. Next slide. I also want to point out here, Southside Relief, we didn't particularly do this planting project, but I wanted to shout out our Department of Public Utilities, RVA H2O, who secured dollars and they greened one of our libraries. And interestingly, Broad Rock Branch Library is the only library we have in the 8th and 9th districts across 2 city districts. It's terrible. But what it means is that this is a critical facility that a lot of people access and visit all the time. And so when you walk up to this space now, you see the nice, permeable surface, you see the trees, you see the shrubs and the native plants, and there's signage everywhere. When I took this picture, I actually saw kids beside me, which I thought was great. There was a mom and a little boy. They were checking out books at the library. They stopped and the kid was like, Mom, look at that, look at that. And they actually visited the space. They walked around. The mom read the signage to the kid, and it was a great learning opportunity as well. So also think about how we can use urban forestry within publicly shared spaces, our community facilities, such as schools and public libraries, how it's a learning opportunity to engage the residents and neighbors within those communities, but also we are doing something significant for our ecosystem and reducing those temperatures in the long run. Last year, we gave away more than 250 trees to homeowners in South Richmond, and I want to tell you why that's significant. For tree planting projects, a lot of us focus on like kind of the public spaces, or if we do something, we might enter into a space like a private space. But how often are we asking ourselves, like, when folks are able to go home, what are they doing, right? Like, what can you do within the physical space that you have, whether you're a renter or a homeowner? And so we gave 250 trees, more than 250 trees last year in 2021. This year, we're having a giveaway in September, in which we're going to give another 200 trees away. And so in the last 2 years, between 2021 and 2022, Southside Relief, we have either planted or given away more than 500 trees to residents in South Richmond. And then that is also part of our community engagement. So even though we're in the pandemic and it is virtual learning quite often, we do like to get into the classroom. And so shown here, I want to give a shout out to my co-founder, Amy Wentz. As you can see, she's in the yellow, in which we actually are like, we're with the people. Amy is a lifelong Southside resident. And so she's able to bring this amazing life and lived experience when we're in the classroom, in which we're able to say to folks like, hey, do you remember when this happened? Or do you remember when this store actually was around? And people really relate to that. What we know and what we continue to share with folks is please don't discount the interest that people have within your neighborhoods. I know that oftentimes from a lot of white-led environmental organizations or even white-led institutions, there is this hesitancy or maybe even fear of approaching Black and brown folks, like, oh, do they care? Or, are they going to be interested? And I want to say, please dispel those myths. It's not true, right? We have incredible crowds of people who show up to our presentations and who want to be in the classroom and they want to learn, because at the end of the day, people care about their communities and they care about where they live. And when you care about your community and where you live, you're going to show up and do everything that you can to make it better. And as we see here, whether it's in the classroom, physically in person, or it's virtually, we always have a great turnout. And those people, now that they have that additional knowledge and they've been educated on the issues, we get to turn them into ambassadors. We get them to become advocates at local government in front of elected officials so they can say, I live here and this is what I want to see within my community. Next. Another great and community engagement project that we're working on is with the Greening Working Group. It's comprised of 18 residents in the city of Richmond. And here is Broad Rock Creek Park, which is I think 17 or 18 acres. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy. But this is one of the park spaces that the mayor has designated will be a new green space for the city. And as you can see right now, it's very forested, very wooded. But it's like when we bring people here, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is in the city of Richmond. And then what we get to tell them next is, guess what? You actually get to design what this park looks like. So over the next few years, working with our Greening Working Group, from residents in the South Side, as well as other folks across the city of Richmond, they are going to be responsible for developing park spaces that look like this. And then Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit about the NOAA grant?
Sure. Yeah. So what's really great about this kind of community engagement too is similarly at the same time, the City of Richmond's RVA Green 2050 Climate Action Plan has been really equity focused and deliberative in trying to consult with the community about their needs and desires when it comes to a thing like a climate action plan. And so through our NOAA grant collaboration, which is a part of the partnerships you heard Sheri talking about, we've created this hyper localized climate resilience forum, basically like a little it's kind of limited to call it a game, but basically people that participate in these events coming up this fall and into next year will weigh the perspective of not only themselves, but real residents from the city of Richmond. So here are two examples of people that we facilitated short interviews with who provided their perspective on how climate change relates to their day-to-day lives in Richmond. And so what participants are going to be able to do is then decide and evaluate where would those two individuals like to invest their resources with regards to particular climate resilience strategies that are in our climate action plan. So we're creating this kind of ecosystem that will both continue to educate our community residents, as well as kind of grass tops actors that we can bring to the table, decision makers, to hear from residents about not only how they feel about other people's perspectives, but how their own interests align with the goals of the RVA Green 2050 Climate Action Plan.
Thank you, Jeremy. And what's significant about that is
2-minute warning here.
Perfect. And what's significant about that is we always want to make sure that we are leading towards justice. And so as you can see, some of the conditions, a bus stop, which has no bus shelter or any tree canopy coverage here. You see a gentleman walking on the street, that's Richmond Highway. That is an average commute for someone who lives in the city of Richmond. There's flooding, there's nuisance flooding all the time. Every time it rains, there's going to be flooding. And then a lot of the trees that we do have within the city, they aren't being maintained or kept up. And all of this comes down to decisions on land use, housing, and zoning. And so what I'm encouraging everyone here is to remember that as you are working on urban forestry or community forestry, and we're talking about mitigating urban heat islands, know that there generally are often underlying social inequities that have been built into our systems that we also have to address. I like to say that these are man-made disasters. This did not happen naturally. This is not a natural occurrence. These are man-made, primarily stemming from white supremacy and racism. And so for everything that we do, just ensure that you are focusing on improving the quality of life and health outcomes for the people within your community. And then next slide. And Jeremy, we can go to the last one. So just some final thoughts here. In this image, you can see a bifurcated city, and this is the city of Richmond. There are people who do not have the same thing, the same resources and services and infrastructure that other parts of the city may have. And again, that comes down to a history of harmful decisions that have been made by people in positions of power. And unfortunately, that continues to happen to this day. And so what is important when we are looking at mitigating urban heat islands, and I always say to people, planting trees is not going to solve racism. We still have to be anti-racist within our work. We still have to make sure that we are showing up for the housing community, that we're advocating for smarter infrastructure investments, making sure that people have healthier lives overall, so that we don't end up with this image of a bifurcated city where there are folks who have something and then folks who do not have something. And then Jeremy, do you have final thoughts?
Thank you, Sheri. The last thing I'd say is that on the heels of the passage and almost, the passage of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the $60 billion for environmental justice and the several billions of dollars for urban and community forestry, that we hope that our message here, resonates with the decisions that your organizations, your kind of grant programs are going to have to make, and recognize the potential that they have, and as well as the potential pitfalls that they may have as we deal with this unprecedented investment in climate-related action in our cities around the country. So thank you very much for your attention, and we're going to enjoy having a little bit of discussion here at the end of the hour.